Read the poetry of post-independence India, and you're hit with textual shrapnel, the aggressive repetition of I, a mocking echo of fighting, fighting, the weight of a severed thumb. These fragments emerged from intense friction. Following 1947, India carried the massive burden of a newly forming nation-state, struggling with unresolved contradictions. The central conflict was internal, attempting to build a modern national identity while navigating the deep linguistic and cultural hangovers of the colonial era. Beneath the grand push for modernization, reality remained rigid. Ancient caste dogmas and strict patriarchal rules quietly enforced social divisions across the everyday streetscape. For the poets of this era, verse was more than an aesthetic choice. It became a tool used to dismantle these inherited, oppressive structures from the inside out. This resistance functioned through three mechanisms: satirical detachment, mythic deconstruction, and the confessional paradox. We must look at how post-colonial writers applied Western literary theories to their own cultural context. This reveals the structural critique embedded in their poetic forms. The resulting Indian English voice functions through a calculated subversion of institutional power, using the inherited language of the empire to expose the cracks in the new republic. In Nissim Ezekiel's The Patriot, the primary tool of critique is the satirical dramatic monologue, spoken by a character who believes himself to be the ideal modern citizen. Ezekiel builds this character using Babu English, translating Indian vernacular syntax into the colonizer's tongue. The overuse of continuous verbs creates a specific fractured rhythm. This linguistic mask reveals a fractured identity. The speaker tries to project a cosmopolitan, peace-loving persona, yet his uncritical view of regional stereotypes and prejudices suggests he is far from the universal brother he claims to be. This character embodies the era's absurd optimism, a blind faith held by the middle class in state-sponsored modernization and five-year plans. Ezekiel captures this by having the speaker list regeneration, remuneration, contraception, as if they were items on a grocery list. Massive, complex societal shifts are reduced to a series of government-delivered promises. The linguistic parody acts as a mirror for a middle class caught between the high-minded rhetoric of a new republic and the reality of its own parochial ignorance. In Pravin Gadhvi's Laughing Buddha, laughter moves away from parody and toward a profound philosophical critique. To find the source of this laugh, we can look to French philosopher Henri Bergson's 1900 study on the anatomy of the comic. Bergson argued we laugh when a living human behaves with the inflexible rigidity of a machine, trapped by habit. Gadhvi maps this theory onto a society trapped in the mindless, mechanical routines of orthodox rituals and caste hierarchies. Bergson also noted that laughter requires a momentary anesthesia of the heart. To see the comic rigidity in others, one must observe them with supreme emotional detachment. This parallels the concept of vairagya, the detached observation central to the Buddha's perspective. Because he is entirely free from worldly desires, he can observe the absurd tragicomedy of human routine with absolute clarity. The laughter in Gadhvi's poem isn't an expression of joy. It is the jarring sound of detached intellect clashing with rigid human materialism. Meena Kandasamy moves the critique into institutional violence. She takes the myth of Ekalavya, traditionally a story of ultimate student devotion, and strips away its romanticized veneer. In her revision, Ekalavya becomes the typical Dalit, a student who possesses inherent genius but is denied the resources given to the elite. This subaltern brilliance is not celebrated. It is viewed as a direct threat to the status of the privileged classes. Kandasamy recasts the teacher, Dronacharya, as an institutional gatekeeper. He uses his power to permanently disable a prodigy who threatens the historically privileged hierarchy. The severed thumb becomes a metaphor for the modern guru dakshina exacted by educational institutions. Today, the price is often the psychological erasure of identity and severe mental distress. Kandasamy concludes with a revolutionary pushback. If the system systematically disables a student, it leaves them with no choice but to use whatever tools remain to fight back. Her mythic revision frames the ancient epic as a foundational blueprint for modern educational gatekeeping. The confessional style of poetry emerged in the 1950s as a rejection of modernist detachment, favoring instead a raw, autobiographical vulnerability. Kamala Das boldly weaponized this style in An Introduction to resist a culture demanding female silence and complete obedience. She first targets linguistic policing. When told not to write in English, she proudly reclaims the language as her own, asserting that its distortions and queernesses are as human as she is. She then exposes the performative constraints of womanhood, the demand that she fit neatly into the categories of wife, cook, or quarreler with servants. Das stretches the confessional I until it dissolves the binary gender roles imposed upon her. She aggressively claims the universal human experience, becoming the saint, the sinner, the beloved, and the betrayed all at once. Her confession is a reclamation of the self, forcing the reader to see the female experience as the center of human experience. The final stage of this post-independence identity is physical departure, explored in Rachna Joshi's Leaving India. To understand the emotional depth of migration, we apply Cleanth Brooks' The Language of Paradox, which suggests that complex truths often require contradictory expressions. This illustrates the foundational paradox of the diaspora. As the speaker travels further from the homeland, her psychological proximity to it actually intensifies. This creates what Homi Bhabha calls a third space, a liminal identity where the immigrant, by attempting to belong to two worlds, effectively belongs to neither. The West, often perceived as a promised land of opportunity, is instead experienced as a space of intense alienation and cultural sterility. For Joshi, exile is a permanent, painful psychological rupture, an ongoing process of leaving that never quite reaches a conclusion. Post-independence poetry functions as an active, structural critique of the new nation-state. Ezekiel and Gadhvi used satirical detachment to mock the mechanical rigidities of language and social orthodoxy. Kandasamy used mythic deconstruction to expose the systems that keep institutional power in the hands of the few. Das and Joshi used the confessional paradox to reclaim agency over the body and the space the immigrant occupies. The Indian English voice is defined by this synthesis, the ability to take the language of the colonizer and turn it into a precise instrument for internal critique and self-reclamation.